Well, hey, welcome everyone to another ODNT Spotlight episode here. Right now, I can never tell what side my camera points. I'm listening to some new post-punk industrial music from legendary punk musician John Shirley. So let me turn that off here so we can hear everybody. And so I'm listening to the latest, greatest music for him. I'll have the link down below for this new album that has come out recently for it. But whether or not you know the name of John Shirley, you might know a lot of the stuff that he has done. And starting off with sticking within the punk musician and the musician theme, he wrote a lot of the lyrics for about 18 songs from the Blue Oyster Cult that were published and put out. But he didn't just stop with just writing lyrics for music. He also wrote some really groundbreaking novels. He got the Bram Stoker Award and the International Horror Guild Award for his collection Black Butterflies. And he is the founding father of cyberpunk with his groundbreaking novel, CITY COME A WALKIN. And did he sit back on his laurels at that point? No, I do not think he did. He also was the principal screenwriter for The Crow, as well as novelizations for movies like Constantine that he's very proud of. And did he stop there? No, he also became involved in pretty heavy major entertainment franchises. Aliens, Predators, Batman, Zombies vs. Robots. And then he was able to sit back and relax. Wait, no, I don't think so. He also wrote scripts for television. Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Poltergeist The Legacy, Batman Beyond, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, all great stuff. As well as, he still had time to write his own novels, and I've only just scratched the surface here with his novels. He's written over 40 original novels himself, and some of his older stuff is coming back out with new publishers, Dracula in Love, The Other End, which is now in development for a cable miniseries, so we'll talk to him about that and see what he has to say about that and dealing with television and everything. And then his most recent ones, Wyatt in Wichita, which is about a heavily researched novel about a young Wyatt Earp in Wichita. And, before all the shows that we know, Tombstone and all the great movies, Young Guns and everything, this is a young Wyatt Earp. And then also Doyle After Death, which is about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle solving a mystery in the afterlife. And then he relaxed. Oh, no, wait. He still did more. Video game novelizations, Borderlands, Halo, Bioshock. I am getting crowded out by all of his stuff, and still, I've only scratched the surface of the enigma that is John Shirley. Well, let's go over and meet John. Hello, John. Welcome to ODNT Spotlight.
Thanks.
All right. So, after all that, now you're all blushing and everything.
I don't think I've blushed for about 35 years.
You've gotten over it. I'm big, I'm powerful, I'm over it. So tell me, what got you into punk music? It was early in your career. That's looks like one of the earlier things you did. You got into the punk music scene and you fronted a couple of bands. You wrote lyrics for Blue Oyster Cult. What got you into that?
Well, I was in Portland, Oregon, and we were just beginning to build a punk rock scene there in the late 70s. That became like the core of the Pacific Northwest punk scene, and then it expanded to Seattle, and you got punk and grunge bands up there. We were influenced by the Ramones, the Sex Pistols, and the Stooges, and the Clash, and some LA bands, and so we decided to create our own nightclub. We created one called the Revenge Club, and we just put up posters and rented a hall and waited for people to show up, and all the strange people from the street showed up. That was our audience. And
a nice dry place to stay for the night.
Well, for a few hours. And we had all had bands that we had created in our garages, if we had garages, basements usually, and we created these really crude bands but they had songs, they had covers. I mean, we started out with covers of the Seeds and simple Sex Pistols covers and so on, and then we developed our own songs, and it went through various phases, but we created a whole scene there. My first band of some significance was Sado Nation. I was the lead singer, and that band still exists. There's a woman who's the singer now. But I created that with David Corboy, and we did a lot of really good stuff that you can find on YouTube.
Yeah.
Johnny Paranoid is kind of a perennial favorite, that song. So I did Sado Nation. I was in the Monitors, and then I moved to New York City, and I was in a band out there called Obsession. We were on Celluloid Records with Soft Cell was on that label, oddly enough, and but also African Bambaataa and Material. There were progressive and early proto hip hop stuff happening out there, and so I was playing around in the New York scene. I played at CBGB, and at the same time, I was always writing books. In fact, books was kind of my day job. And to me, my main object was to be a songwriter and performer. And I played in a lot of nightclubs and did a bunch of recordings. I have a few albums out, but it became eventually evident that my real living was in writing fiction, and I focused on that, and I made a lot of connections in the New York publishing industry and put out a lot of books, some of which are still in print. And then I have books from Simon and Schuster and Random House that are in print, like Demons, for example, the horror novel, and Crawlers, the science fiction horror novel, and so that kind of became the center of my life. But then I had to do what everybody did. I had to go to Los Angeles because that's where writers got paid most of the time. And
television and movies.
Yeah, and I did have friends and fans. I had fans working in television there who got me gigs, and I wrote some Deep Space Nine, and I wrote a Max Headroom, but the show was canceled just as they were about to go into production.
And no, so close.
Television. That's television, but I got paid. And I wrote various odd things. I wrote episodes of Sinbad, for example, and Poltergeist: The Legacy, pretty good horror stuff. And then I was involved with the very earliest stages of The Crow, the movie based on the comic books by Brandon Lee. By the comic books by James O'Barr, starring Brandon Lee.
Right, exactly.
And the name Brandon Lee fuddles me because I'm still not over his dying during the course of their making the film.
Yeah, that was tragedy. That was tragedy.
It's like, that everybody who is connected to it is it's still a sore point. It's still a source of pain, and the movie was almost done, so they were able to finish it and release it. But because of the production's failure with gun safety, an actor accidentally shot him with a gun that shouldn't have even been firing projectiles of any kind.
Right.
So that is like this, shadow we carry from The Crow. But the movie was a success anyway, and
I loved it. I mean, we wore out our VHS copy and got it on DVD when that came out.
Yeah, he was very good in it, and Alex Proyas did a great job realizing The Crow. But it started with James O'Barr's comic books, and I was trying to write a comic book. I just had an outline. I was pitching it to indie comic book companies, and it was called Angry Angel. I pitched it to Caliber, and they said, I'd like to do it, but we have one like this, somewhat like it, called The Crow. And I became curious, and I found this black and white independent comic in just a dusty corner of a comic book shop. And it had its followers, but it wasn't really a big thing at the time. And I bought a copy, and I just thought it was so cinematic. This comic book was like a storyboard for a movie.
Oh, wow.
And it has showed the influence of movies, westerns, classic westerns, and Japanese cinema and Chinese, like Chinese supernatural films. And so I just felt like here's a movie waiting to happen, and why can't a comic book act as a storyboard and show them how it's going to work? And I took it to Jeff Most, who was a friend of mine just getting into producing, and he and I worked up a treatment, and then we took it to Edward R. Pressman, and Pressman got it set up, and I wrote the first 4 drafts of the script, and David Scow came on, did a great job, and we share credit. But Brandon Lee was killed.
Yeah.
So, my mind keeps going back to that, and it's hard to let it go. But I think that there will be a remake. It hit a speed bump this summer. It was going to be started this summer, but I think there will be one, and they're going to go back to James O'Barr's comic books to some extent, and then of course my script is going to influence the thing.
Right. And
I feel like it's probably going to be a worthwhile project, and it's going to happen, I think, next year.
Wow.
So yeah, and then along the way, I ran into people who were friends of one of my favorite rock bands, the Blue Oyster Cult.
Uh-huh.
So I never completely let go of songwriting, and would do it on the side. And I wrote lyrics for them, and I did most of the lyrics in their most recent 2 albums. And one of them was in the movie Roadie, a recent movie. The song's called "I Want to See You in Black Because It Makes Me Feel Like Your Husband's Dead." That was my title. And that's in the movie, and you can get that on their album, Heaven Forbid. And I was talking to Buck Dharma, the lead guitar player, the guy who wrote "Don't Fear the Reaper,"
and
co-wrote "Burning for You" and "Godzilla," and those are their 3 radio songs. And I asked him if there was going to be a new Blue Oyster Cult album, and would it be probably a download album, because that really seems to be like where you go next.
Right, it's all digital now.
And he said yes, that is the plan.
Excellent.
And so that's I don't have any other confirmation than that Buck Dharma said to me, yes, that is the plan. But Blue Oyster Cult fans.
So let the rumors begin across the internet. Blue Oyster Cult coming out with a new album.
Yes, and
You heard it here first.
I did give him a song lyric that he really liked recently. So I'm hoping that I will be represented on the album also.
Oh, that would be awesome. Awesome. So you made the move to LA and started working on television stuff. What was it like working with Hollywood after dealing with publishing? Where you do your own thing with your own novels, and now you're writing in somebody else's world on television.
Well, it is more a committee process in Hollywood. And so, producers are always giving you notes, famously. And, you get these things from editors too, and you get editorial suggestions, sometimes more, sometimes less. But in Hollywood, it is ever present. And it can be a bit of a struggle. So you have to find some way to live with that and make peace with it.
Right.
Unless you're not tour like Woody Allen or somebody, that's what you have to do.
Right.
And so it took me a while, and projects went sideways behind some of this. Adaptation and failed adaptation, but some things were done. I made a television movie for Showtime at one point, and that actually got made. Worked in some low-budget films, and I'd rather forget them. But I got paid.
That's the important part.
Pay the writer, as Harlan Ellison says. And then some stuff, which I will not name, I feel was swiped from me. And you're much more likely to have something swiped, a concept, a bit of a story for television than in publishing. There are certain people who will do it, and it's just not uncommon. That doesn't mean like if you're planning to work in the business, you're going to constantly have that issue, but it is an issue.
But know that it might happen to you. Well, not might. The longer you're in, it will. Right?
Well, there's a reason that the Writers Guild has a program for registering scripts early on, where anybody can register a script at
right.
first fee, so that you can protect yourself. I'm having a bit of another kind of encounter with pollen.
Oh.
Thanks to global warming, we have hay fever here at a time when we shouldn't.
Oh no!
And nature here is like saying, well, okay, if you say it's summer, then it's summer, and it's exploding with pollen at a time when it really wouldn't. And so I'm dealing with that, and
I got the cough drops.
Occasional congestion.
I got the cough drops, the water.
That's just me reacting to the 21st century as it unfolds. That's a tiny little symptom here before you in person when I cough of the coming 21st century central dilemma, the problems relating to global climate change.
Well, starting with all the way back in your first books, you've always been looking to the future. I mean, you're the founding father of cyberpunk, which is a very technological mixed with nature type future, at least how it has evolved. So what is your take on the future? Haha.
Well, I gave one of those TEDx talks, and my title for it was Why I'm Optimistic Because Everything Will Be Terrible. And the reason it's titled that is because I think we're going to go through a period of really enormous problems, something like World War II, but without quite it being a Marshall issue so much as just other kinds of human struggle on a vast scale, especially immigrants who are, just quite reasonably looking for a better place to live, and they're being pressed in the near future. They're going to be pressed more and more out of place, displaced by climatological changes.
Right, so major disruption.
You're going to have more and more refugees from climate disaster, and then that's going to cause social pressure in other areas where a struggle for resources and living space and jobs, of course, obviously, but that'll create a sort of social chaos that's always like bubbling around the edges, and there's nothing to be done about that. These people have to be helped, they have to be accommodated, and they're going to come in greater numbers. What we're seeing right now as a result of the war in Syria and other kinds of military ramifications in the Middle East is also related to climate change there, because a lot of the political and military movement there has to do with perennial droughts that are becoming more and more common and wider, and so they're sort of pushing people into being more aggressive, and then that leads, along with the Allies and the United States' responsibility for having helped create the Iraq War and the problems there. threw everything out of balance. All of that together adds up in one equation to what we see with this surge of refugees to Europe that everybody's having to find ways to accommodate now. The USA is planning to take 30,000 at this point, last I heard.
Right, yeah, they were increasing the numbers.
They're increasing the numbers. So that's just like a microcosm of what we're going to face.
Right, that's only scratching the surface.
Well, kind of. It is maybe 10% of what it's going to be like over the next 40 and 50 years.
Big change.
There's going to be just enormous displacement of people, and we're going to have problems with also raising enough food for everyone. Not only because although the population is leveling out some, we still have an increasing population. You hear numbers between 8 and 12 billion. I think probably it'll end up being something like 10 billion. And so there's that issue, but really, climate change will cause a problem with agricultural availability. So we won't be able to raise food as readily as we had before. And then that means less food. And we're not going to go so far as Soylent Green, but there's going to be there will be synthetic food. And to greater degrees, we'll be building high-rise farms.
Right.
And they're experimenting with them now. I predicted these in my books, and since they're contained, they are protected from the outside world. They're not going to be subjected to a dust bowl problem. They won't need pesticides, which are actually more of a problem. They do more harm than good over the long period. So there is some value to that. Plus, since they're vertical farms, that leaves a lot of green space down below where you can plant. You can figure out what plants to put down so that you can counter the tendency toward dust bowl climatological changes,
right,
and produce more oxygen and soak up more carbon dioxide that way, because you've got more room on the ground since you're building farms straight up. That's one of the things that I think is going to happen. And so the point is that we're going to lose a fair number of people. We're going to struggle with famine, and those things can push people to wars. I think there may be a third world war, but it won't be a nuclear war. It'll just be a big, ugly war, probably centered in the Middle East area, but it may also involve Asia and Africa, because it might end up being a religious war, at least on the surface. Underneath, you struggle with Islamic extremists. Really, it will be a war about resources and land, and the kind of like religious polarity and extremism is just going to be the rationale, in my opinion.
Right, that'll be the lead in to it.
And we will be, working with friendly Muslim nations if this war does come about, as well as, against Muslim extremists. My neighbors next door are Muslim folks, and you never met sweeter people.
Right.
And most American Muslims are moderates, and Muslims are not the problem. The problem is any kind of extremism.
Exactly.
Whether it's and any kind of religious extremism, always a problem. Right, yeah. Right-wing Christian extremism is a threat of domestic terrorism.
Right, exactly.
So we have to worry about those people too. And every time that there is competition for scarce resources, then people tend to go to extremes. They tend to clump together in extreme groups, and they get very xenophobic.
Right. The harsher life becomes, the more extreme they can become.
They can become more extreme in their views, and and they tend to be more xenophobic, more suspicious of the other. Anybody who's strikingly different, and sometimes that that can really multiply within itself, so that our extremism makes their extremism more extreme, and their extremism makes ours more extreme, and so on.
Never ending. It just builds and builds and builds, and then
pow! It can be a cycle.
Right.
And so, but ultimately, it's going to go back to people being pressured about homes and jobs and resources. So the only way around that is to have a kind of a series of developing, evolving social safety nets, and I think that is the savior of mankind. That's what's going to be the saving grace of mankind, are these new social safety nets that will extend internationally, and because we'll see that it's either that or chaos. We'll see it's either that or just a wreckage. So that is where I come to the optimistic part. Because of all this threat and damage and polarity, we'll be forced into having to take care of people. We can't. They're going to be all intermingled among us and right close up against us. We can't exterminate them, and we shouldn't want to, of course.
Right.
But the extremists will probably be outvoted by people who say, no, that's not practical. We have to take care of these people because ultimately it's taking care of ourselves.
Right. And
so
there it is.
We'll be forced into a better scenario through some horrific scenarios.
Those that survive,
but it's an arc, of struggle.
Excellent. So that's the future. Let's talk about the past. You are well known for doing a lot of futuristic science fiction, horror stuff, but you decided to do your very first historical novel about Wyatt Earp. How come?
Well, I've always been enamored of the Old West, the Wild West, because out on the frontier, the truth about a person comes out very quickly. In the suburbs and in the comfortable middle ground, people can sort of hide in their little lawn contained cocoons, but out on the frontier, the character has to emerge, and there's so much drama there as a consequence, and you can see it in the better Western films. Like a lot of Westerns are really terrible, but there are great ones like Anthony Mann's films, like Winchester 73, or John Ford's films. You can see that starkness. It's almost like film noir, which is urban instead.
Right.
But westerns have that kind of shadowy, dark element that to me, that's something about that excites me, especially against the backdrop of the open wilderness. It's just like endless possibilities out there. That's why you could have outlaws hiding in real life, like Butch Cassidy and those guys, the Hole in the Wall gang, for so long. Jesse James got away with what he did for so long because you had this openness out there where
They could just run off.
They knew that world far better than people like the Pinkertons that came in to enforce the law. And now we've got Bass Reeves coming on HBO. I wish I was involved with that. You know who Bass Reeves was?
No,
Bass Reeves is probably the greatest lawman of the West, and he was a black guy. He was an ex-slave, an African American who became a deputy marshal in Indian Territory, just west of Arkansas, and that whole big Indian territory out there that was had a total different range of laws going. It was mostly Indian laws. So if there was major outlawry there, and there was, they had to send in these guys who would penetrate this wilderness to find them, and they really had to be good. And Bass Reeves was exemplary. His name terrified these guys, literally. I mean, a lot of them, it got to be after he was out there 20 years that if somebody said Bass Reeves is looking for you, the guy would go, holy cats, and he would go and turn himself in. Because Bass Reeves shot 14 guys in the line of duty that we know of. And he didn't go out to shoot them. He brought in far more than he shot.
Right.
But he sometimes had to kill them. And if you look at the real statistics, he got his man far more than Wild Bill Hickok or Earp or any of these guys. He was the best shot known in the territory, and the best tracker. But he was illiterate because when he came up as a slave, it was against the law in the South for slaves to be taught to read. So when he escaped, he was already an adult, and most of the time he was out on the trail working, and he just never learned to read. So he had to always find somebody to read the writ for him, or and to work up the paperwork for him.
Figure out who's he's after.
Yeah, well, I mean, he just memorized their names and faces and where they were, and he knew where all these towns were, but he was completely illiterate as it happened. So that was a peculiarity, and all of that is going to be dramatized in this HBO miniseries coming, which John Sayles has written. And I'm really excited by it, because years ago I pitched the Bass Reeves story in Hollywood, tried to get people interested. It wasn't the time. Right. And then Morgan Freeman got into it, not from my angle. He had found out about it independently, and he pitched it. And by degrees, it took him years, but he's finally got it set up as a miniseries. And this is one of the great stories of the Old West that most people don't know about. An African American.
Yeah, never heard about it.
I mean, you could compare it to Django if you want, but this guy was real, and he was so effective that the white people in Arkansas, where there was a lot of prejudice, grudgingly said, "Yeah, he's damn good." So that's Bass Reeves. So that's just an example of how exciting the Old West can be and there was still things we're learning about it all the time. So I went back and got into one of my childhood heroes, Wyatt Earp, and I found people who knew about him, and the better biographers like Alan Barra and Casey Tefferteller, and I visited Tombstone, and I've been to his grave, and I've read letters he wrote, and I really got deeply involved in researching it and trying and find out what his life was like as a young man, as he was just first becoming a lawman in places like Ellsworth and Wichita. And also he was involved over in Deadwood, where Wild Bill Hickok was killed later. And so I bring Wild Bill Hickok into it. Another thing is that Billy the Kid grew up in Wichita part of the time and happened to be there when Wyatt Earp was there.
Oh. They might have
So
known each other.
they might have known each other. And this is a novel, so while I do take a lot of historical incidents and dramatize them, I also novelize and fictionalize. And I have brought Wyatt Earp together with a even younger Billy the Kid.
Billy the snot-nosed kid.
Basically, that's right. And he's a major part of the story. But at the time, of course, his name was not Billy. His real name was Henry McCarty, and later on he changed it to William Bonney as a pseudonym, not as an alias.
Right.
So, but at the time he was just a kid named Henry McCarty, and he's a part of my novel Wyatt in Wichita. So fans of Wyatt Earp, fans of Tombstone, they'll find that this book has the same tone as like the movie Tombstone. That's and kind of like the television series Deadwood. It's that tone where it feels very grittily real, as much as I could make it. And you don't lose the sense that a person can do something heroic, but you're realistic about them. You see the dark sides of their life too. And Earp was involved in prostitution. And I show how some of that played out and why he left that behind.
So fans of Deadwood and everything in Tombstone are going to find a lot to like in Wyatt in Wichita.
I think so. True West magazine, their book reviewers said it was the best Western historical novel of the year. So
excellent.
I felt vindicated.
There you go. Winning all sorts of awards and recognition, and you're a damn fine writer, so of course it's the best Western of the year.
I like that point of view.
So, what is next from the great John Shirley? What can we expect from you upcoming in the next months, weeks, years? What do we have? What can we expect from you? Because it looks like you're not slowing down anytime soon.
Well, recently the novel Doyle After Death was released. It's from HarperCollins. It's about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and there's a lot about him lately. They just did a miniseries about him from BBC and PBS called Arthur and George, which you might have seen, about real life Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. But Doyle also was a spiritualist. I'm not a spiritualist, but I'm interested in the possibilities of an afterlife. A spiritualist is a guy who believes in mediums and so on, and and they think that they have all the details of what a putative afterlife would be like.
Right.
So I kind of explore that, and I have a character who is a modern detective who dies in Las Vegas and then goes to this afterlife where he meets Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and becomes sort of like his Watson to Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, and they solve mysteries in the afterlife, in the strange world of the afterlife.
That's so cool.
And it's a very ambitious thing to do, and it's just been out for a little while, and it seems to be working for people. Doyle After Death. And then I'm planning a novel called Stormland, based on some stories I have. I'm going to use them as the core of the novel. One of the stories is coming up in Analog magazine pretty soon. Stormland is about a part of the United States that is all storms, all day, all year.
Oh no!
Every year. It's the southeast area around Charleston and extending south and westward from there a ways. It's like when one hurricane ends, another one starts. Essentially, there's just very little downtime between hurricanes, and they're like Category 7 hurricanes. I mean,
there's nothing standing anymore.
Very little is standing. There are, and the towns are flooded, but there are people who have squatted there within the what's left of these cities, and these kind of mostly knocked over old buildings, and they have this weird little subculture there because you can live there free, and so you have a kind of post-apocalyptic society right next to the pre-apocalyptic society that we have now. This area is just, because of peculiarities of the climate change, permanent storms, and so it's called Stormland by people. And I'm working on developing that, and I'm planning to pitch it as a movie too.
Oh, okay.
And or proof of climate change. Hollywood shouldn't be any.
You are the litmus test.
I'm the litmus test. And one of the guys who developed the television series Rome for HBO developed my my novel The Other End, which is a very peculiar, it's an alternative apocalypse. It's basically like, if you don't want to live the judgment day created by religious right extremists, well, what kind of judgment day would you create if you could design one?
Right. So
I made my own. And I have a rationale for how it works and everything in The Other End. This is The Other End.
Right.
And he's developing it as a miniseries. We'll see how it works. I mean, these things, I've had a lot of things in a I've sold television pilot scripts to NBC before, and one was an awful lot like Heroes about 5 years before, and they didn't use my thing.
Oh no.
Well,
you're just too far ahead of your time.
Yeah, maybe that was it. Maybe it was coincidence. But and I was paid, but they didn't develop mine, and years went by, and then this other thing came out, and these things happen. Sometimes you can't tell where the germ of a project really came from. But so there's The Other End, and then I'm working on something called Time Warrior, which is science fiction has to do with people soldiers being moved out of their time to fight for a futuristic reality show in real battles through time. So you have a guy from the Civil War fighting against Roman soldiers, perhaps, just as an example, and about how they're trying to get back to their own time and get out of this. And it's a combination of action, adventure, and social satire. And it makes fun of reality shows, projects them into the future to their extremes. So I'm developing that with Tibor Takas, who's a director who's done a lot of things. He's done like the reboot of The Outer Limits. He worked on that, and he worked on Sabrina the Teenage Witch, and he was producer of that. And he's done a lot of movies, old science fiction movies like The Gate. He did a recent science fiction horror film called Spiders, about giant spiders. So he and I and Stephen Bugaj, who worked for Pixar, are developing Time Warrior.
How excellent!
We'll see if that gets set up. We're optimistic, and we're getting ready to take it out.
All right, yeah, we are dealing with Hollywood, so who knows? Yeah. Excellent. So, as we wind up this interview here, is there anything you would like our viewers to know about you, or anything you want them to pay attention to?
Well, there's what we all need to do is pay attention to the developing world around us. I mean, you look away, and then when you look back, the technology has changed on you, and usually people don't ask you about it. I remember when they got rid of gas station attendants. Suddenly, you had to be your own gas station attendant.
It's all self-serve.
Yeah, self-serve, and it was like passing the labor onto the consumer. And the same thing happened in supermarkets in some places where they're replacing cashiers with self-serve stations at the supermarket. If you go to IKEA, you build your own furniture now.
Right,
I mean,
outsourced all the work to us.
I know that's what it seems like. And also, technology comes that we're just barely aware of, and suddenly it's there. Like people suddenly are complaining that information about them is all over the internet, being culled and used by advertisers, and they're being targeted by them. These things were there to be seen coming, and we didn't see it. Now we complain about it as it becomes part of our lives. So look around, and instead of a singularity of, downloading people into robotic bodies or something, which I don't believe in, you'll see the Internet of Things will come, and you'll suddenly be surrounded by it. With the Internet is around you in a room, for example, and we have to make choices, informed choices about technology. And, so that's one thing science fiction is for. In my book, Stormland, but other people's, all kinds of great writers like John Scalzi and all kinds of people are providing this sort of mirror of the near future, so that we can see what the effects of all these changes are going to be in our lives, possibly. That makes science fiction useful for more than entertainment. So so you can always turn toward that. We're here to help.
All right. Well, hey, thank you so very much, John. Go ahead and stay on the line. Let me close down the interview for all the people watching and everything, and then I'll come right back to you and we'll chat for a couple more minutes. So I'll be right back. So thank you very much for being on the ODNT Spotlight, John.
Thank you.
All right. I'll be right back. Oh, let me turn all these off. All right, so I can see me. Okay, that's good enough. All right. So again, thank you very much for watching another ODNT Spotlight. Today we had the legendary punk musician and quadruple, centuple threat. He does anything and everything that has to do with writing, books, novelizations, scripts, television, and he's working really hard to entertain all of us. And I have links to his website and his blog, also to his latest EP release, Mountain of Skulls, which was the music that we were listening to at the beginning. And I'll play just a few more seconds of that for you. And let's go ahead and start this right up. There it is. So, John Shirley, legendary punk musician, legendary everything. So thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to ODNT Spotlight. We have many more guests coming on. And thank you very much. Have a great day.